Good morning. Today we're going to talk about social beliefs and judgments. We're going to start to enter some of my area of expertise-ish, right? Because I mean my my PhD diploma it was in experimental psychology, but it's in the subfield of judgment and decision making. So we're in the judgment part, but as pertaining to social judgments. Okay. Now, in this topic, we're going to break it up first into the way we perceive our social world, the way we judge our social world, and the way we explain our social world. Okay? So we perceive the world. That is to say, we respond to reality as we perceive it. And we've already talked about if you believe there's a pimple and you believe people are staring at you, then that is the reality. Okay, so we've said this idea. But our perceptions of our social worlds are influenced by a variety of things. Priming is an interesting thing that comes out of cognitive psychology originally. And so what happens is that in the original study, what happened was there was people were brought into a research laboratory, and on the way in, there was a poster of a rabbit on the wall. It was just they just passed through it. It wasn't nobody pointed it out or anything like that. Just passed it by. And then what happened was later on they were asked to draw pictures to go with words that they heard, and the word hair was used. And if people passed a picture of a poster on the wall, almost inevitably they ended up drawing a rabbit when they heard the word hair. So it's kind of a neat thing, this priming. You take this idea, the idea of a rabbit, and you bring it to the surface of the mind to make it accessible or something of this nature. Okay? And so look at this. People completed sentences containing the words old, wise, and retired, and then they walked slower afterward. I like that. All right. If you watch a lot of scary movies or crime dramas on television, you're more likely to interpret an ambiguous situation as dangerous. All right. First impressions, right, are clearly important. First impressions are more powerful than you can imagine. It's just they've done some studies, some fascinating ones. One of them they took and they filmed a professor teaching a class, and they filmed 15 seconds in the first day of class, 15 seconds in the middle of the class, and 15 seconds towards the end. So a total of like three 15-second clips of this professor, and then they had people rate the professor, how you do on the IDEA surveys. And it was amazing because the students actually sat through the class, and the students that looked at 45 seconds rated them almost exactly the same. So the impression that was left in those 45 seconds was enough to solidify what was happening. Our beliefs shape our interpretation of everything. And again, this was that Princeton versus Dartmouth football game and how many infractions they saw. But it's the same thing, people believe that their chosen candidate won a presidential debate. I mean, I have no doubt who won every presidential debate in the year 2016. It was very clear who won them all. Huh? Belief perseverance is persistence of a belief. That is to say, once you have created a belief, you hold on to it. In some cases, it's almost like sunk costs. You've invested so much in this belief. Boy, how much is it going to take before you change your mind? And so this actually is one of the reasons why an accusation of crime can be such a problem, because even if the defendant is in fact found to be innocent, the accusation has been made and it will persist. Or persevere, I suppose, huh? All right. 85% of college students agree with this kind of a statement. Okay. Memory can be likened to a storage chest in the brain in which you deposit material and from which we can withdraw it later if needed. Occasionally, something is lost from the chest, and then we say we have forgotten. Okay. And the problem with this is that this is not how memory works. And we'll definitely spend a lot more time on this when we get down to the topic about the social psychology and the legal system or whatever it would be. Because if 85% of college students agree with this, then 80 or 90% of jurors believe this. This is just not true, okay? Memory doesn't work like this. Instead, what happens is that memories are an active, living thing. Okay, they're subject to all kinds of influences at the moment that they're created. While they're sitting in storage, they decay. If we retrieve them, we may not retrieve everything. Even once we retrieve something, we keep it in our working memory and use that memory, and then restore it again. And then when it gets restored, it becomes a different memory than it was the first time. Okay, so it's quite an interesting thing. The most classic study on this was Elizabeth Loftus's work, where she videotaped a car accident. Okay, she had a videotape of a car accident, and what she did was off the table. Cat is just looking at me like I'm not in charge of the house. Okay, off the table, right? So half of the people were when they were shown the video were asked this question: how fast were the cars driving when they hit each other? And the other half were asked how fast were the cars driving when they smashed into each other. And what an amazing thing. Those people that said, they heard the word hit, they were like, oh, that was a 32-mile-an-hour accident. And those that heard smash said, oh, that was a 48-mile-an-hour accident, something like that. Okay, wow, okay, hit versus smash made a real difference. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to, I'm going to call you back in a couple of weeks, so be prepared. A couple of weeks later, they come back. And in a couple of weeks, they say, was there glass at the scene of the accident? And here's the thing. The people that heard the word hit, used the word hit, it influenced them to say 32 miles an hour. And now all of a sudden, the stored memory that they have is a memory of a 32-mile-an-hour accident. And so a 32-mile-an-hour accident is like a fender bender in the neighborhood or something. Nobody's going to hurt there. And so if you remember a 32-mile-an-hour accident, you're going to remember most likely no glass. Those people that had heard the word smashed heard a 40 whatever mile an hour accident, and clearly a 45-mile-an-hour accident is much more severe and is much more likely to involve glass. So once they all watched the accident together and stored the memories, then they were all asked to retrieve the memory into working memory to answer the question about how fast they were driving. Now that they've modified their answers 32 and 45, then they recode that memory back in to be pulled up another day. When pulled up later in the future, you get the results. We find that all people are suggestive, but children in particular, and this is troublesome. You can implant almost any memory in children. And what's crazy is that once a false memory is implanted in anybody, but again, particularly in children, then as far as the children are concerned, it's just just another regular memory, and we'll act on it as such. Okay, and so the misinformation effect is this idea that misleading information can lead to incorrect storage, and so it's troublesome. And again, in a legal perspective, what happens is that the people, asking witnesses are saying to the witness, take the memory that you've encoded, retrieve it, then we're going to work with it for a while, and then you're going to recode it. Okay, you see the problem is depending on how the questioner wants to work with the memory could easily influence what it looks like by the time it goes back into storage. And our final slide on this particular little subtopic. People's memories of past events are just, we reconstruct them. I remember I went on a vacation to Disney World one time, and in retrospect, wow, especially with the pictures, you're looking at, that was the best vacation ever, but at the time it was miserable, waiting in line, and kids were always asking for crap to buy, and so we reconstruct past attitudes to make them fit our schemes better. Okay? And we also reconstruct our past memories. Okay? People in surveys, they always remember smoking less cigarettes than were actually sold by the stores. Okay? Or people recall voting much more at higher rates than actually people vote. So clearly there's a disconnect here between our memory of the past and the truth of the past. And so we reconstruct them as we go. All right, I'll stop on that one, and our next little sub-module, or whatever we're going to call it, is going to be about social judgment. So you be ready for that one because it's awesome.